I was ready to crash at my hotel after a long day when my boss called, demanding I be back at the office by 8 a.m. Exhausted, I quickly booked a flight, packed, and headed to the airport. It was too late to call my wife, Anna, without waking the kids, so I asked the taxi to take me home. As I quietly entered the house, everything was dark except for the light in our bedroom. I heard voices, Anna and another man. My stomach dropped. Realizing my wife was having an affair, I felt like I was going to be sick. My grandparents had always told me to keep my cool, no matter what. So I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my temper, which I had inherited from my grandfather. He'd warned me more than once that it could destroy my life if I let it. Instead of flying off the handle, I decided to gather proof. I had a new smartphone from work with a great camera and microphone, so I began recording from the shadows. Though my pride was crushed, I knew I needed this evidence. I also realized I'd have to get a DNA test for the kids after all this. As I recorded, something they said hit me like a ton of bricks, and I lost control. Without thinking, I rushed into the room and tackled the guy. We fought, and I managed to throw him out of the house. Anna, terrified, was huddled in the corner. "Come here," I ordered, my voice cold and distant, like someone else was speaking. When I lose my temper like this, it's like I black out. It's happened maybe 4 times in my life, and this was one of them. "Come here," I repeated, and Anna crawled toward the bed, shaking. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry," she pleaded, but I wasn't interested in her apologies. "Shut up," I snarled, barely recognizing my own voice. "Do you regret those times with Tom too?" I needed to know how far her betrayal went. Anna shuddered, and I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on. "You've ruined everything. This house, this room, this bed," I said, letting my anger take over. "You've betrayed your husband and your children." Her face went pale, her eyes wide with fear. Oddly, I felt like my anger was comforting me, like it was reassuring me I was in control. "You're going to pack your things and be gone by noon. Take everything from the bedroom, especially the bed, but leave my things in a neat pile. Got it?" "How am I supposed to do all that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't care. Ask your brothers for help, the ones I lent money to," I said coldly. "By noon." She nodded, defeated. I grabbed my bags, tossed them into the car, and drove off. My reflection in the mirror shocked me. My nose was broken, my face bruised. I headed straight to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors found my nose was broken. I had 2 fractured ribs and a possible concussion. They wanted to admit me, but I refused. I had to be at work soon. The police showed up, and I told them I couldn't remember much. I said I was the victim, and since I didn't see Tom in the ER, I figured he was fine. The officers tested me, found I was clean, and let me go. They trusted me, likely because I worked for a major company in town, and one of them had a sister who worked with me. I went straight to the office and crashed on the couch in my boss Clara's private office. She had been the VP of our company for years and was one of the few people I trusted. Her brothers, who co-owned the company, constantly messed things up, and she was always cleaning up after them. When she walked in and saw me, she gasped. "Daniel, what happened to you?" "Let's just say I came home to surprise my wife, but she surprised me instead," I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "Know any good divorce lawyers?" Clara didn't skip a beat. "Laura Miller. She was my college roommate. I'll give her a call." Within minutes, Clara had Laura on the phone. "Morning, Laura. I have a friend who needs a divorce lawyer. Can you see him today?" she asked. Turning back to me, she said, "She'll make time for you. Now tell me what happened." "Clara, I'll tell you everything, but can you sit in while I talk to Laura? I don't want to repeat it more than once." "Of course, Daniel," she agreed. We spent an hour fixing some mess her brothers had caused before Laura arrived. When I told them what happened, I left out the part about my temper. I showed them the video I had recorded. The footage showed Tom asking Anna, "Am I more important than your kids?" To which she replied, "I don't care about them. I'm yours." Laura and Clara were speechless. I couldn't contain my anger. "Laura, I want full custody of my kids, even if it costs me everything. I don't want to pay her a cent. My kids are with her parents now, but I want to pick them up as soon as possible." Laura sighed. "Daniel, I'll do my best, but full custody is tough, even with this evidence. She could claim she said that in the heat of the moment. I'll start drafting the papers, but stay calm and don't make any more mistakes, okay? I'm sorry, Laura. I lost control before, but I'll keep it together from now on, I promised, hoping I could keep my word. Thanks for taking my case, Laura. I'll stay calm and avoid any more mistakes, I said, feeling a bit embarrassed. Laura gave me a stern look. Make sure you do, Daniel, she replied. Clara says you're the best, I added, trying to lighten the mood. After a quick chat with Clara, Laura left, and we got back to work. But after a couple of hours, I felt a surge of anxiety. The beast inside me was on edge, worried about Anna leaving the house by noon. A part of me wanted to let her stay, but the beast had other ideas. I couldn't control it. Clara, I need to handle something personal. It'll take an hour or two, I said, feeling the panic rise. Go ahead, Daniel. Just come back when you can, she replied. I rushed to my car, praying I could keep it together. When I arrived home, there was a moving truck outside, and Anna's brothers were loading up the mattress. 2 police cars and 3 officers were there too. I grabbed my laptop and approached the officers. Officers, I have something to show you from last night, I said, trying to stay calm. The sergeant, a tough-looking woman with kind eyes, asked, Are you Daniel Carter, Anna's husband? I nodded. Yes, and I'm happy to answer your questions, but please watch this first. The officers looked like they were ready to arrest me, but the sergeant agreed to watch. Stay right there, Mr. Carter, she ordered. I started the recording and turned up the volume. When Anna's voice said, I don't give a damn about them, she dropped the box she was carrying. As we all watched, a small bag of white powder fell out. Sergeant, I think you should see this, I said, pointing it out. The sergeant spotted it too and called for backup, running over to Anna. I remembered another part of the recording and zoomed in on a mirror on the bedside table with white powder streaks. I showed it to one of the officers, and soon after, they cuffed Anna, who broke down sobbing. Her brothers looked stunned but continued loading up her things. What just happened? I asked, trying to make sense of it all. Your wife's under arrest for possession of illegal substances. We'll test it to confirm, but it looks like drugs, the sergeant explained. I felt panic setting in. What about my kids? When can I get them? I asked frantically. Where are they now? The sergeant asked. At Anna's parents' house about 5 miles away, I answered. She gave me a concerned look. These are your children, Mr. Carter. With your wife in custody, you have every right to get them. I'd suggest you do that now, she advised. I love them, but what if things get ugly? I don't want a scene in front of the kids, I said, worried about what might happen. The sergeant's expression softened. I'll follow you to your in-laws. There won't be any violence. But I'll need a full statement of your injuries, she said. I explained the situation to her, handed over my hospital paperwork, and described what happened last night. She whistled as she read the report. Does it hurt? She asked, glancing at my bruised face. Not yet, but I know it will soon, I replied. Feeling lightheaded, I leaned against her patrol car. Maybe I should take you to the hospital, she offered. I'm just exhausted. I've only had 2 hours of sleep. I need to pick up my kids and get back to work. We have a daycare there, I explained. Okay, let's get you to your in-laws, she said, helping me into the patrol car. During the drive, she gave me some solid advice. You should get temporary custody and a restraining order to keep your wife from the house or the kids. While she's in jail, you have the upper hand. Use this time wisely, she advised. I will, I promised, quickly calling Laura to explain the situation. She assured me she'd have everything ready by the next morning. By now, I'd started calling the sergeant by her first name, Sarah, and even found myself flirting a bit. She gave me a few strange but not unfriendly looks. You seem almost happy, considering everything, she said, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged. I'm about to see my kids. I thought I wouldn't see them for weeks. Sure, my marriage is over, but I'm not letting it ruin me. I've got my kids, and I've got good people helping me. I'm just trying to stay positive and smell the flowers, you know? I said, with a playful grin. I don't know if you're crazy or just need sleep, Sarah remarked, shaking her head with a smirk. There was no drama when we got to my in-laws' house. Sarah calmly explained that we were there to take the kids, and they handed them over without any fuss. I could tell they knew about Anna's betrayal all along. My kids were ecstatic to see me and were thrilled to ride in the police car. Hope, my 5-year-old, asked if she could hear the siren, while Luke, my 3-year-old, wanted to sit on Sarah's lap. Introducing her as Aunt Sarah probably didn't help. Sarah gave me a look that was equal parts amusement and disbelief. Aunt Sarah, are you coming to our house tomorrow? Hope asked, her excitement contagious. Sarah smiled slightly but shook her head. I wish I could, sweetie, but I'm too busy. Curious, I asked, what hours do you work, Sarah? 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, she replied, eyeing me cautiously, probably unsure why I was asking. Perfect. You can come for dinner tomorrow at 6:30, I suggested, grinning. Hope's been wanting to show someone her doll collection. Hope's eyes lit up, and she beamed. Yeah, Aunt Sarah, come see my dolls. Sarah hesitated. John, I didn't agree to, she began, clearly trying to find an out. I gave her an innocent look. You don't want to disappoint Hope, do you? I said, adding just enough guilt to sway her. Sarah sighed. Okay. What do you want for dinner, Hope? She asked, giving in. Chicken. Hope announced, her decision final. Sarah chuckled softly. All right, chicken it is. Should I bring anything? She asked. Ice cream. Hope replied immediately, excited at the prospect of a treat. Sarah smiled, the situation finally sinking in. Okay, I'll bring ice cream. Thank you, Aunt Sarah, Hope said, with Luke echoing her. I waved as Sarah drove off, knowing she was probably wondering what she'd gotten herself into. I could almost hear her thoughts. What am I doing? John could still be in trouble if Hendricks presses charges. I never imagined being sent to his house. She likely remembered seeing me with the kids at the park 2 years ago, admiring how I played with them. I always thought John Blake should be a model, she might have mused, recalling how women would gather around when I was there with Hope and Luke. But now, things were different. And he flirted with me. Maybe he's just been through a lot, she likely reasoned, trying to dismiss the strange connection she felt. After dropping the kids off at daycare, I headed to work, feeling surprisingly upbeat despite everything that had happened. Clara was already there, and as we got started, I couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted. Maybe it was because my marriage had felt over long before I caught Nina cheating. Clara noticed something was off, though. John, you're doing great today, but you look exhausted, she remarked. By the end of the day, the exhaustion had caught up to me. Clara, I think I'm going to need to take tomorrow off. I can barely keep my eyes open, I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. Of course, John. Take all the time you need. I might call you if something urgent comes up, but you deserve a break. I'm really sorry about everything you're dealing with, she said, her concern genuine. Thanks, Clara. Good night, I replied before heading home. That evening, I ordered pizza for dinner. The kids were thrilled, but during dinner, they asked the question I'd been dreading. Daddy, where's Mommy? Why isn't she home? Hope asked softly. I sighed, trying to find the right words. Mom and I had a big fight, sweetheart, but we both love you very much. For now, she's going to stay with your grandparents, okay? Hope looked sad for a moment, but then she hugged me. It's okay, Daddy, as long as you're with us, she said. Luke nodded, hugging me too. Their words hit hard, making me realize how many nights they had spent with their grandparents, probably while Nina was sneaking off to be with someone else. The beast stirred inside me again, but I pushed it down. There was no place for anger tonight. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I arranged for a nanny to come by the next morning. I knew I'd need help getting the kids ready, especially with everything going on. I also transferred most of the money from our joint accounts into my own and canceled our joint credit cards. I thought about emptying our safe deposit box, but decided to hold off for now. We all slept in the guest room together, so I could be close by if the kids needed me. The next morning, Luke woke me up. Dad, someone's at the door, he said, shaking me awake. Just then, my phone rang. Mr. Blake, it's Gloria from the nanny service. Are you home? Came a kind voice on the other end. Yes, Gloria. The key's under the doormat. Come on in, I replied groggily. Moments later, I heard the door open and footsteps coming upstairs. Gloria, a warm woman in her 50s, introduced herself and immediately got to work. She had a kind, calming presence, and it wasn't long before she had Hope ready for daycare and Luke entertained. Later that day, a messenger from Laura's office delivered the temporary custody order and restraining order. Laura called shortly after. "John, Nina's been served with the divorce papers. She'll likely be released from jail tonight. But with the charges against her, you've got a strong chance of getting full custody," she explained. With Gloria picking up Hope from daycare, I took the chance to visit the bank. I opened a new safe deposit box and moved most of our shared belongings into it, leaving only Nina's things behind in the old one. I also set up new checking and savings accounts in my name only, ensuring our finances were secure. Although I didn't mind splitting things in the divorce later, I wasn't about to let Nina waste money on bail or drugs. By the end of the day, I was finally starting to feel the physical pain from my injuries. My ribs ached and my nose throbbed, but somehow, I felt better than I had in days. I had taken control of the situation, and for the first time, I felt like I was moving forward. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least I knew I was doing everything I could for myself and my kids. I decided to pick up some chicken from the store for dinner. I wanted to cook something simple for the kids and ease back into a routine. Gloria had left earlier, but I asked her to come back tomorrow, as I still wasn't fully ready to handle everything on my own. Sarah came over just in time for dinner, and we had a nice meal with the kids. Hope, ever curious, asked Sarah if she could see her weapon, which made Sarah smile as she carefully explained the dangers of real weapons. Throughout the evening, I could tell Sarah was worried about me. She kept asking if I was okay, and I played up my symptoms a bit, hoping she'd stay longer. She ended up staying through 2 movies with us. I pretended to feel dizzy again and asked her to sit close, just in case. During the second movie, Sarah shared her experience interrogating Peter Hendricks. She told me how he was terrified of me and claimed I attacked him. But when she showed him the video and listed my injuries compared to his, he backed down and decided not to press charges. I admitted I couldn't remember much of that night and didn't plan on pressing charges either. After she left, I felt relieved and exhausted. Over the next few weeks, I redecorated the bedroom and replaced all the furniture, making it my own. I stopped communicating directly with Nina, handling everything through my lawyer, and focused on healing. My ribs mended, but my nose still hurt. I found ways to have Sarah spend more time at my place, though I hadn't made a move yet since I was waiting for my nose to fully heal. When I finally got the doctor's clearance, I took my chance. We were watching a movie, and I pretended to be dizzy again. I grabbed us both ice cream, and instead of sitting in my chair, I sat next to her on the couch. After some quiet moments, I pulled her closer. She looked at me, confused. "What are you doing?" she asked. "The doctor said my nose is healed, so I'm making a pass at you now," I said. She blinked in surprise, calling herself ugly. I stopped her, telling her she was strong, beautiful, and that I liked her. Then I kissed her. That night, we didn't finish the movie. Things between us changed, and she agreed to come over again the next day. As things progressed, I asked Sarah if she was free on a Saturday night. She invited me to her apartment for dinner. I showed up with flowers and chocolates, teasing her about wearing dark clothes. She blushed as she let me in. "What's for dinner?" I asked. "Lasagna," she replied. "Can you turn it off?" I asked, moving closer. She hesitated but agreed. That night, we made love for the first time. The lasagna was almost ruined, but we managed to eat together, enjoying the moment. It felt like everything had fallen into place. Later, as we cuddled on her couch, her phone rang over and over until she finally answered. Her neighbor Beth was on the other end, worried and ready to break down the door. Sarah laughed, pressing herself closer to me. "Everything's fine, Beth. Trust me, everything is just fine," she said with a smile. "I have a friend over," I said, pressing against John's chest as I spoke to my neighbor Beth through the phone. "Sorry if we disturb you tonight." "Is it that gorgeous guy from yesterday?" she asked. "Yes, it is," I replied with a smile. John leaned over and kissed me as I heard laughter and cheers from outside. My neighbors, mostly single women, were likely watching. As a police officer, I had gotten to know them well, and tonight, I knew they'd be entertained. We made love all night, and when John woke me the next morning, he was already dressed and ready to leave. He needed to pick up his children, and I understood, though I was still sleepy. He kissed me goodbye, promised to call, and I drifted back to sleep, trusting him to lock the door. It had been a wonderful night. As I left Sarah's apartment, I stepped out to flashes of light. 5 women were standing there, clapping and taking pictures. Feeling a bit awkward, I bowed and thanked them, then walked down the hall, humming a tune my grandfather used to sing. Over the next few months, my time with Sarah was limited, mainly because of Hope and Luke, but the nights we did spend together were lovely. However, there were 2 big issues in our relationship. The first was her emotional distance. Though we connected physically, she often pulled back emotionally. The second was her choice of clothing. She always wore black or dark gray, as if she were attending a funeral every day. I often wanted to shout, "Wear something bright for once." Meanwhile, my divorce was moving forward, and Laura proposed a settlement, but Nina's side refused. From Laura, I learned that Nina's affair had started 6 months before I caught her with Peter. It began when my former friend, Mike, invited her to a party, got her drunk, and gave her illegal substances. This led to a 2-month affair of wild parties whenever I was away. When Mike feared I would find out, he passed Nina off to Peter, and she continued cheating until I caught them. Nina had since been convicted for substance use and was in rehab. She naively thought I'd forgive her or agree to joint custody. Nina tried to convince me by offering to have her therapist explain her situation. But despite all her excuses, she had willingly slept with Mike and Peter while neglecting our children, often leaving them with her parents. In contrast, my grandparents had fought for years to get me out of foster care after my parents died. Nina, on the other hand, abandoned our kids so she could have affairs. Finally, the divorce day arrived. We presented our evidence to the judge, who watched the video and examined both of us. She seemed to think Nina was unhinged and granted the divorce under Laura's original terms. Nina received half of our assets and retirement accounts, but not my company pension. I had to pay her half the equity in the house and keep her on my health insurance for 5 years unless she remarried. She was left with about $350,000 and 2 supervised visits with the kids per month. Neither of us had to pay child support, and I got full custody. After the divorce, Peter Grossberg moved out of state, and his wife filed for divorce. Mike, my former friend, moved across town and avoided me whenever we crossed paths. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, Sarah ended things with me. She said she didn't see a romantic future between us, but wanted to remain friends. I was disappointed but not surprised. She'd always held back emotionally. A few weeks later, she told me she had met a local FBI agent, and though I wished her well, we still met for the occasional lunch or dinner. About a month after our breakup, I was putting the kids to bed when I heard strange noises at the front door, whimpering and scratching. Thinking it was a stray dog, I opened the door to find Nina leaning against the screen door, barefoot, without a coat, crying and scratching at it. It was 1 in the morning, and I feared the worst, but she was unresponsive. Rather than call the police, I decided to get her warm. I ran a hot bath, undressed her, and placed her in it, remembering her preference for the water temperature. Nina always loved long baths, so I set it up just like she used to enjoy. I turned on her favorite I Love Lucy DVD and brought her a strawberry smoothie and a grilled cheese sandwich, knowing she probably hadn't eaten in days. She silently ate everything and stayed in the bath for almost 2 hours, probably fearing I'd throw her out at any moment. Eventually, I brought her one of my bathrobes and firmly told her to stand up and get dressed. Afterward, I carried her to the guest room and set her up with more Lucy DVDs, telling her to relax and that we'd talk in the morning. I washed her clothes at the laundromat and went to bed, my mind full of questions. The next morning, I decided to let the kids surprise her. At around 9, I took Hope and Luke into her room, telling them there was a special surprise. They were thrilled to see their mom, climbing onto the bed and shouting, "Mommy, Mommy!" Nina hugged them tightly, overjoyed, as if she hadn't seen them in years, even though they'd had supervised visits. It was a sweet moment, but the pain of her betrayal still lingered in my mind. After the excitement died down, Nina offered to make breakfast for the kids. She glanced at me for permission, and I nodded, deciding it was a good opportunity to give her more time with them. After breakfast, the kids ran off to play, and I sat down with Nina at the kitchen table for a serious conversation. Nina, you can't stay here forever, I said. I need to know what's going on. She sighed and looked down at her hands. John, my family never liked you. They always thought you were too soft, and they assumed you were cheating whenever you traveled for work. I knew it wasn't true, but over time, I started to believe it. That night, Mike introduced me to pills and the affair, and I lost sight of being a good mother and wife. My therapist has been helping me figure things out, but I know I've hurt you. She paused, then continued. At my parents' house, they took advantage of me. They made me do all the hard work, and I found out my father had been writing checks from my account without my permission. He even gave my car to my brother. I feel like an idiot for trusting them and betraying you. I listened carefully, then replied, First, we'll go to the bank to sort this out. Then we'll file a police report. You don't need to press charges, but it might get them to return your property. Nina nodded, clearly worn down from everything. We found an old pair of garden shoes for her to wear since she didn't remember where her shoes had gone. At the bank, we discovered her father had stolen almost $100,000, leaving her with only $250,000. Afterward, we went to the police station, where I asked to speak with Detective Sarah Watkins. She was surprised to see us together, but after hearing the situation, she promised to investigate. Nina's parents began calling me frantically, but Nina refused to talk to them. Eventually, all her property was returned, including her car. They had to pay back $25,000 immediately, and they signed a loan agreement to repay the remaining $75,000 over 10 years, using their home as collateral. After that, Nina cut all ties with her family, wanting nothing more to do with them. Later, Nina asked, John, can I stay in the guest room for a while, just to reconnect with the kids? I know I've hurt you, but I need to get back on my feet. I looked at her seriously and replied, Nina, you caused me severe emotional trauma. If you stay, you'll need to help around the house and take care of the children. I'll set strict rules to rebuild trust, and the house will be under video surveillance. This will be difficult, so think carefully before accepting. Nina flinched at the thought, but after a moment, she agreed. Her therapist was against it, but we made a plan. She would continue therapy, stay on birth control, and buy clothes of my choosing. I paid her a salary for her work around the house, which the kids liked. Still, I kept a strict emotional distance from her, making sure to protect myself from getting hurt again. Throughout this time, I confided in Clara about the situation. Clara wasn't worried about Nina. She was more concerned about me. She feared that living with Nina might prevent me from finding real love. I reassured her by telling her about someone I was interested in, but who was currently unavailable. Clara was relieved to hear that I had a plan for my future and wasn't planning on getting back together with Nina. Despite my efforts, living with Nina wasn't easy. Although I kept my emotions in check, it felt like I was walking a tightrope. I focused on the kids and on getting through each day. Meanwhile, my divorce from Nina had finally been finalized. Nina received half of our assets and retirement accounts, but I kept my company pension. I also had to pay her half the equity in our house, but I was granted full custody of the kids. Nina only had supervised visits twice a month. I was relieved the legal battle was over. Sarah had left me around the same time, wanting to remain friends but feeling we didn't have a future together. Though I was sad about it, I understood. She had always held back emotionally, and I noticed her distance during our time together. Not long after, she told me she'd met an FBI agent, and I wished her well. We still met for lunch occasionally, but I had accepted that our romantic relationship was over. About a month after Sarah and I split, I was putting the kids to bed when I heard scratching and whimpering at the front door. Thinking it was a lost dog, I opened the door to find Nina, barefoot and without a coat, leaning against the screen door and crying. It was 1 a.m. I was worried she was on drugs, but she didn't respond to me. Instead of calling the police, I decided to help her. I ran a hot bath, undressed her, and put her in, remembering how she liked the temperature. There was a tension in John's eyes that was unsettling, worse than when I'd first seen him bruised. Watching him had become one of my few pleasures, so it was hard to see him like this. I knew I needed to stop worrying about his personal life and focus on helping him find happiness. He'd been a pillar for Hammer Incorporated, especially as I quietly bought back shares over the years, increasing my stake to over 35%. John's charm secured 7% of the employee vote, and he easily won over the women who held the remaining shares. Thanks to him, the transition of leadership went smoothly, and my brother retired to the Caribbean. To reward John, I invited him to dinner at the Hilton, which had the best prime rib in town. I congratulated him with a bonus check and offered him the position of vice president. But to my shock, John declined. "Clara, you're doing a great job running the company, but I can't accept the position," he said, tension clear in his eyes. "There's a woman I'm interested in, and company policy forbids me from pursuing her. So I'll have to resign." I was stunned. "John, I can change the rules. I can't lose you," I said, desperate to keep him. But John remained resolute. 2 weeks earlier, in preparation for his new romance, he had distanced himself from Nina, and now he was ready to move on. He reached across the table and took my hand, the intensity in his eyes growing. Then, to my utter surprise, he asked, "Clara, would you like to dance?" I was floored. It had all been a setup. He chose the Hilton not just for the prime rib, but because it had a dance floor. I stood there, speechless, as he gently lifted me from my chair. "You? Me?" I stammered. "But I'm much older." "You're the one I want," John replied softly. He pulled me onto the dance floor, and we danced through 4 songs, completely forgetting about the food. When we finally returned to the table, John smiled and revealed a room keycard. "They have room service, but we don't need food right now," he whispered before kissing me. I was completely swept away. I followed him to the elevator, and we spent the night together. I couldn't believe it. John, the man I'd secretly admired for years, loved me. The following Monday, I called an emergency board meeting to announce John's resignation. The board, a group of mostly women who adored John, were shocked. I explained that John had fallen in love with an employee and chose to quit to pursue the relationship. Though they respected his integrity, they quickly agreed that we couldn't afford to lose him. They decided to change the company policy and offer John my old job. Mary, the new president, eyed me suspiciously. "Clara, you didn't say who the woman is. Since you're close to John, I bet he told you." "So, who is it?" I hesitated as the room of John's fans stared at me. "It's me," I answered quietly. The room erupted in cheers. They were thrilled for me. For the next 3 months, John and I were inseparable. He confessed that since catching Nina cheating, he had become a carnal beast, and I did my best to keep up with his high drive and energy. We were discussing marriage when I nervously told him I was pregnant. I had lied about being on birth control. John, far from upset, was overjoyed and wanted to marry me right away. Our wedding was small but elegant, held at the Hilton with about 100 guests. Hope was the flower girl, Luke the ring bearer, Laura was my bridesmaid, and Sarah, John's best friend, stood by his side. Even the judge from John's divorce attended, joking about never wanting to see us in court again. It was perfect. After the wedding, I bought my brother's family estate, and John's entire family moved in, including Nina. I allowed Nina to stay for Hope and Luke's sake. She continued working as a maid, nanny, and mother, but with a generous pay raise. Nina still wore the colorful clothes John had chosen for her, and I decided to brighten up my own wardrobe too. The change in clothes made me feel lighter and more carefree. John and I found happiness together, and I finally felt like I had everything I'd ever wanted. Nina's longing looks at John were heartbreaking, but he refused to believe she still loved him. At 4 months pregnant, I was already struggling to take care of John. Even before showing, I was falling behind, and the tension in John's eyes was returning. He wasn't in the best shape emotionally, and it felt like it wouldn't take much to upset him. That's when I had a radical idea. I needed help, and Nina seemed like the obvious choice. I approached Nina with the suggestion that she help care for John while I dealt with my pregnancy. She was more than enthusiastic, but I warned her that I needed to talk to John about it first. When I brought it up with John, he was heartbroken and felt like a failure for not being able to control his desires. I'd never seen him cry before, and I cried with him. He made me promise I'd still love him if he gave in to Nina, and that I'd always have control over him and his inner beast. After a lot of persuasion, John reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. In the 7th month of my pregnancy, Sarah came to us in tears. She had become a close friend over the past year, and seeing her so upset was heartbreaking. She didn't want to talk to John, but she confided in me. Her boyfriend had betrayed her, exposing private details about their relationship to her superiors, which damaged her career. I immediately called Laura, who sued Sarah's ex-boyfriend for everything he owned or would own for the next 20 years. He lost his job within weeks. To help Sarah move forward, I offered her a job at the company, creating a corporate security department just for her to lead. Professionally, Sarah did well, but emotionally, she was still struggling. I eventually convinced her to move in with us. She was hesitant at first, but I could see the sadness in her eyes whenever she looked at John. One day, I asked her why she had left him. "I didn't feel worthy of him," she admitted. I reassured her that was nonsense, but she was still reluctant to reconnect with him. Meanwhile, John hadn't experienced real love in months. Though he had a physical relationship with Nina, it wasn't love. He needed more than that. I discussed this with Sarah, suggesting she rekindle her relationship with John. At first, she was worried it would hurt my marriage, but I trusted John. We had built something solid, and I had full confidence in him. After some hesitation, both John and Sarah agreed to the arrangement. The change in Sarah was immediate. She began dressing in bright colors, even wearing dresses around the house, which lifted her spirits and made John happy. When John was happy, everything in our home seemed to run smoother. I felt like I had everything I ever wanted. A baby on the way, 2 stepchildren I adored, a loving husband, and 2 close friends who had become like sisters to me. Life was as perfect as I could have imagined. However, a year later, John was struggling internally. He loved the life we had built, but he also felt out of control, torn between me, Nina, and his unresolved emotions. Between me and the beast inside him, he felt like he had no say over his own personal life. He confided in me, feeling guilty about everything, and said he needed someone to talk to and a way to take back control. John realized that the beast had one weakness. When he was with the kids, the beast left him alone, and he had moments of clarity. So, he decided to take advantage of these moments and write everything down, trying to sort through his feelings. One day, John decided it was time to seek outside help. That morning, Dr. Margaret Huff, a psychiatrist, was preparing for her day. She had just been lost in thought, working on her latest romance novel, when her secretary announced that her next patient had arrived. Margaret wasn't prepared for what walked through her door. John entered the office carrying his baby daughter, Victoria, in his arms. Margaret's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. He was the kind of man any romance novelist would dream of putting on a book cover. Trying to remain professional, she introduced herself and motioned for him to sit. "Dr. Huff, I'm John Blake, and this is my daughter Victoria," he said with a quiet but strong presence. Margaret tried her best to keep her professional demeanor, though she couldn't help but be captivated by John's striking looks. As John settled in, Margaret realized this session was going to be unlike any other she'd had before. Whatever this man had been through, it was clear he was at a crossroads, struggling to regain control of his life. Margaret braced herself, knowing this wasn't going to be an ordinary meeting. John looked down at his daughter with such love and tenderness. This man seemed perfect, so why was he here? What could I possibly help him with? "Please, call me John," he said, looking at me with deep despair. "I have an unusual problem. I'm not sure if I have a split personality or not. I've written a diary, a story of my life. It might take you some time to read it, but I'd like you to go through it, and maybe we can meet again next week." His eyes were so full of anguish that I'd have given him my kidney if he asked. "Of course, John. Let's meet again at the same time next week," I replied. Over the next week, I read John's story at least 5 times, and I also looked at the photographs he included. Nowhere in his diary did he describe the women in his life as anything less than beautiful. One photo, a family Christmas card, showed John with 3 women, 2 children, and an infant, likely his daughter Victoria. Sitting beside him were 2 pregnant women, neither particularly attractive, but the love radiating from the photo was undeniable. Every night, I looked at that photo and then at myself in the mirror. How had they been so lucky? I was no less attractive than them, yet I had no one like John in my life. The following week, John came back with Victoria. His story had left a deep impact on me, and I had spent a lot of time thinking about it. John, you talk about the beast, a part of yourself that takes over. It likely stems from your traumatic experiences in foster care, but in every instance, the beast seems to act as your protector, not as something out to harm you, I said. John seemed surprised, as if he had never thought of it that way. You're right. He's been my protector, harsh at times, but he's kept me safe, he admitted. I smiled. Maybe you should stop demonizing him. Give him a different name. Something more friendly. John chuckled. What about Bob? No one's ever heard of a monster named Bob. He closed his eyes for a moment. I think Bob likes his new name, he said, smiling. John looked at me without any sign of judgment or revulsion, which was rare for my patience. Most couldn't even meet my eyes, yet John always treated me with kindness. He began to share updates about his life. Clara didn't want me wasting my skills as vice president, so I'm now a board member and a special assistant. It's great because I only work 30 hours a week, which gives me more time with my family. A week later, John arrived in a more distressed state. Clara wants to bring another woman into the house, he confessed, clearly upset. She's pregnant again, and with Sarah and Nina also due soon, she's worried I won't be taken care of. It's all out of control. I knew something had to be done. John, would you allow me to talk to Clara? I'm sure she loves you, and we can find a solution, I offered. He looked terrified at the thought of me intervening, but eventually agreed. When I met with Clara, we spoke for several hours. I explained John's concerns. She understood that they were breaking societal norms, but she was happy with her life and didn't see why society should care. John feels like he's taking advantage of everyone, I said gently. He needs to know that you're all genuinely happy. Clara's lips curled into a smirk. What exactly are you suggesting, Margaret? She asked. I can call you Margaret, can I? I hesitated, but then quietly said, I'd like to apply for that position. Clara's grin widened, clearly amused by my boldness. The next Christmas, another family photo was taken. John stood surrounded by 4 women, all smiling brightly. 3 of them held children, while the 4th, me, stood pregnant beside them with the biggest smile of all. A few months later, John was sitting with Clara. Clara, I keep seeing Judge Grant from our wedding around. Are we in trouble? He asked, concerned. Oh no, John, Clara replied with a smile. No trouble. But we're all pregnant again, and we have to take care of you and Bob. Judge Grant has been interested in you for a long time, so I thought we'd bring her into the family too.